My father always told me, Claire, the most dangerous people aren't the ones who look evil. They're the ones who earn your complete trust. I didn't understand what he meant until the man I married destroyed everything my family had built. My name is Claire Anderson. I'm 28 years old and I grew up in Dallas, Texas. My father, Richard Anderson, was one of the city's most respected businessmen. He built Anderson Holdings from a small real estate company into a multi-million-dollar business empire. Everyone admired him, not just because of his success, but because he treated his employees like family. After my mother passed away when I was a teenager, it was just the two of us. He wasn't only my father, he was my best friend. One Monday morning, Dad introduced me to the company's newest senior executive. "This is Ethan Brooks," he said with a proud smile. "I think he's going to help take this company even further." Ethan stood confidently in a tailored navy suit. He was polite, intelligent, and surprisingly humble for someone with such an impressive resume. "Nice to meet you, Claire," he said, offering a warm smile. I smiled back politely, but something about him felt rehearsed. I couldn't explain it. Over the next year, Ethan became Dad's most trusted employee. He worked late every night, solved impossible business problems, and somehow always knew exactly what my father needed before anyone else did. The board admired him, the employees respected him, and my father trusted him completely. "People like Ethan are rare," Dad told me one evening over dinner. "He's loyal." I wanted to believe him, but every time Ethan smiled, I felt like I was looking at someone wearing a mask. Soon, Ethan wasn't just spending time at the office. He started joining us for family dinners, holiday celebrations, and weekend charity events. Little by little, he became part of our lives. Then, one evening, during dinner, Ethan placed his fork down and looked directly at my father. "Richard, there's something I'd like to ask you." Dad smiled. "Go ahead." Ethan glanced at me before taking a deep breath. "I love Ethan. I'd like your blessing to marry her." The room fell completely silent. I stared at him in shock. He had never said those words to me before. Dad looked at me with gentle eyes. "The decision is yours, sweetheart." For weeks, I wrestled with my emotions. Did I love Ethan? I wasn't sure, but he was successful, respectful, dependable, and my father trusted him with everything. Eventually, I said yes. Our wedding became one of the biggest social events in Dallas that year. Everyone said we looked like the perfect couple, and for a while, it almost felt true. But only a few months after we got married, things slowly began to change. Ethan started involving himself in every major business decision. Long-time executives quietly disappeared from the company. New faces took their places, people Ethan had personally recommended. One evening, I finally confronted my father. "Dad, don't you think Ethan is taking control of too much?" He laughed softly. "Claire, you're worrying over nothing." "But he isn't just my employee anymore," Dad smiled proudly. "He's family." I forced a smile, but something inside me refused to settle. Later that night, I walked past Ethan's home office. The door wasn't fully closed. His voice drifted into the hallway. "The first step is done," he whispered into his phone. "Richard trusts me completely now." He paused. "Now all that's left is Richard." Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. What exactly did he mean, and why did it sound like my father was in terrible danger? I froze outside the office door. Ethan's voice was calm, almost emotionless. "Everything is going exactly as planned. Richard doesn't question a single thing anymore. Soon, the company will be mine." My heart pounded so hard I thought he would hear it. Before I could listen any longer, the old wooden floor creaked beneath my feet. Silence. Then Ethan spoke. "Who's there?" I rushed back to our bedroom before he opened the door. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, Ethan acted like nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead, smiled across the breakfast table, and asked if I wanted more coffee. It was terrifying how normal he looked. I knew I couldn't accuse him without proof, so instead, I started watching. Over the next several weeks, I quietly returned to Anderson Holdings and began reviewing company records. Something wasn't right. Several executives who had worked with my father for decades had suddenly resigned. Every one of them had been replaced by people personally recommended by Ethan. I contacted our former chief financial officer, Michael Carter, and asked if we could meet privately. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. Michael looked nervous from the moment he sat down. "Claire," he said quietly, "your father made the biggest mistake of his life by trusting Ethan." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Ethan pressured me to approve financial transfers and corporate documents that would slowly give him control of Anderson Holdings. And when you refused?" Michael looked down at his coffee. "I was forced out. I felt sick." "Did you tell my father?" He sighed heavily. "I tried." He sighed heavily. But Richard believed Ethan over everyone else. Driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about what Michael had told me. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about money. Someone had spent years carefully earning my father's trust. That evening, I confronted Dad again. "Dad, please listen to me. Something is wrong. Ethan is hiding something." He smiled patiently. "Claire, successful people always attract rumors." "But—" "No." He gently interrupted me. "I trust him." Those 4 words broke my heart. A few weeks later, Ethan announced he wanted to organize a private birthday celebration for my father, just close family. The location was our lakeside Anderson estate outside Dallas. The evening seemed perfect. There was music, laughter, old family stories. For a moment, I almost believed I had imagined everything. Then my father stood up. "I'm going to take a short walk by the lake. I'll be right back." It was the last time I ever heard his voice. About 15 minutes later, someone screamed. Everyone ran toward the lake. My father was lying motionless near the shoreline. Paramedics arrived within minutes. They did everything they could, but it was too late. Richard Anderson was gone. The official investigation found no immediate evidence of foul play. Authorities ruled it a tragic accident while the investigation remained open. I refused to believe it. Nothing about that night felt accidental. After the funeral, Ethan became the picture of the grieving son-in-law. He comforted guests, he handled business meetings, he stood beside me every moment. Then, only days later, he called a board meeting. He calmly placed several legal documents on the conference table. Richard signed these before his death. "Until Claire is ready to lead the company, I'll serve as acting CEO." I stared at the documents in disbelief. My father never mentioned this. Ethan looked directly into my eyes. There were many things Richard handled privately. His smile was almost invisible, but I saw it. For the first time, it didn't look kind. It looked victorious. As the meeting ended, Michael Carter quietly walked over to me. Without saying a word, he slipped a small envelope into my hand. "Your father gave this to me 2 days before he died," he whispered. "He told me to give it to you only if something happened to him." With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was an old brass key and a handwritten note. It read, "Claire, if you're reading this, trust no one, especially Ethan. The truth is waiting inside the hidden safe in my old office." My breathing stopped. Whatever my father had discovered before he died, he had left it for me. And I knew one thing for certain.
The real fight for my family's legacy was only beginning.
I didn't sleep that night. I kept staring at the old brass key in my hand while my father's final words echoed in my mind. Trust no one, especially Ethan. At sunrise, I drove to the original Anderson Holdings headquarters. The building had been closed for years, but I still had access. Walking into my father's old office felt like stepping back in time. His favorite leather chair still sat behind the desk. Family photos lined the shelves. Everything looked exactly the way he had left it. My hands trembled as I removed the old landscape painting from the wall. Behind it was a hidden safe. I inserted the key. The lock clicked. Inside were several folders, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter. I unfolded the letter. Claire, if you're reading this, then my worst fear has probably come true. I trusted Ethan because I believed he cared about this family, but months ago I discovered he had been quietly replacing loyal employees with people who answered only to him. I hired private investigators to document everything. The evidence is inside this safe. If anything ever happens to me, take it to the authorities. Remember, wealth can be stolen, but truth always finds its way back. I'm proud of you. Love, Dad. Tears blurred my vision. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. It contained financial records, internal emails, forged corporate documents, and security footage collected over several months. One video made my blood run cold. Ethan was sitting in a private conference room with 2 associates. He smiled as he said, "Once Richard is out of the picture, control of Anderson Holdings will fall into my hands. No one will ever see it coming." It wasn't a confession to murder, but it revealed a calculated plan to take over my father's company through fraud and deception. I immediately turned everything over to federal investigators and our family's attorney. Within days, the investigation expanded. Bank records were subpoenaed, corporate accounts were audited, hidden financial transfers began surfacing. The truth Ethan had buried for years was finally coming to light. Several weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every seat. Former employees sat silently behind me. Ethan walked in wearing the same confident smile he always had. He looked at the jury as if he had already won. Throughout the trial, he insisted he had loved Richard Anderson like a father, but the evidence kept growing. Forged signatures, secret bank accounts, fraudulent contracts, private emails, and finally, the video. The courtroom fell completely silent. For the first time, Ethan's confidence disappeared. After reviewing the overwhelming evidence, the judge ruled that Ethan had orchestrated an extensive scheme to fraudulently seize control of Anderson Holdings. All authority granted to him was immediately revoked. The fraudulent agreements were declared invalid. Ownership and leadership of Anderson Holdings were officially restored to me. As deputies escorted Ethan out of the courtroom, he stopped and looked back at me. There was no arrogance left in his eyes, only defeat. A few weeks later, I stood beside my father's grave with a bouquet of white roses. The Texas wind moved gently through the trees. "I kept my promise, Dad," I whispered. "They almost took everything, but they couldn't take the truth." Just then, my phone rang. It was the chairman of our newly appointed board of directors. "Congratulations, Miss Anderson," he said. "Today marks a beginning of a new chapter for Anderson Holdings." As I looked across the Dallas skyline, I realized something my father had tried to teach me my entire life. A family's greatest inheritance isn't money. It isn't buildings. It isn't power. It's integrity. Because fortunes can be stolen, companies can be manipulated, trust can be betrayed. But sooner or later, the truth always finds its way home.